Hallo, schönen guten Tag, meine Damen und Herren. Herzlich willkommen zu dieser Runde zum Thema transatlantische
Good
Verkettung.
afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to an interesting round. We will deal with climate damaging and LNG excavation in Canada and a German credit guarantees. It's storming outside, it's raining, but it's nice in here. Now, first of all, I would like to check some technical details. Now, if you want to listen to the event in another language than the one which is spoken on the screen, you pick the other language. So you can choose between German and English, and we will have translation from German into English, from English into German. Now, we do have a minor delay in the interpreting process. That is to say that you might have to be patient. If you ask a question and wait for an answer, it might take a second more. Now, we also have a chat function and a Q&A function in our online system. And of course, you can ask questions, make remarks, comment on what we say. And there also is a Q&A functionality which you can use in order to pose questions you might have for the panel discussion, because we will have a number of presentations and afterwards there will be a panel discussion, a round table. And of course, you can also like what you hear. Now, I don't want to focus on the contents. Konstantin Zerga, however, he is the director of the Department of Deutsche Umwelthilfe, and he is one of the initiators of today's event. Konstantin, the floor is yours. Thank you very much. Now, this has become a whole series of events we've been hosting together with the HBS and others. And I'm happy that we focus on the transatlantic dimension today. Now, Germany does not have an LNG terminal for the time being. We do have a lot of gas in Germany. Germany is the most important gas market in Europe, but right now we don't have our own capacities for the import of LNG. But this is about to change. There are major plans in Germany. The federal government and the regional governments have major plans, i.e. they want to establish 3 LNG terminals in Brunsbüttel, Wilhelmshaven, and Stade. That's on the North Sea coast. And it's important to know that these are still plans. For the time being, there are neither decisions about the investments to be undertaken by the carriers of the respective projects, and no applications have been made so far. So it's still possible to prevent these projects, in spite of the fact that the initiators tend to insinuate that the first LNG ship will arrive soon. Now, this will have a major impact on our climate goals. 3 terminals, LNG terminals, which include a capacity amounting to 40 million tons of CO2. And it's quite evident that in view of the lifetime of these facilities, which is about 30 years, we won't manage to achieve the climate neutrality we want to achieve by 2050. And we want to be climate neutral much earlier. That's at least what the Deutsche Umwelthilfe thinks. So these terminals will hamper our climate goals, and that's why we are fighting against the project together with partners in the countries where these terminals are being planned. And there are also transatlantic connections due to the pressure exercised by the Trump administration on the German government, because he wants the terminals be built in order to open the German market for fracking gas imports from the United States. That's evident. The US American energy minister has traveled in Germany and in Europe, and he made advertising for the freedom gas, and there are major promises made. And our Minister of Finance, Olaf Scholz, also sent a letter to his US colleagues, and he offered 1 billion euros for the terminals in order to convince the US to give up their objections against the Nord Stream project. So at the end, we'll have the mega pipeline for the import of natural gas plus 3 terminals in Germany. And all this is truly hampering and hindering the energy transformation we actually pursue. And then, of course, we need to look at the background, the corporations that support the projects. For them, the Finnish group has bought up Uniper, which has been the sole investor for the 3 terminals for the time being. And on the other side of the Atlantic, it's one of the most important gas dealers of the world, and they also have natural gas and LNG contracts from the terminal in Goldboro, which again shows that there are close business links, and there are close links between politics and business, and thus it's logical that we also try to close our ranks, so to speak, and get together. And we are happy to have guests from Canada with us today in order to talk about the different perspectives of this crazy project. And this is also meant to be a message, because we are standing shoulder to shoulder, because we would like to offer resistance against these fossil fuel projects, because they imply a major environmental destruction also on the local level, and they are dangerous too. We, the Deutsche Umwelthilfe, decided to be part of the resistance movement, and we will also sue the investors and the government should there be licenses for these terminals in the end. This is about political interests and geopolitical games, but this is not what matters most for us, because we would like to protect the climate. And we would like to have a transatlantic cooperation on this particular level. We don't want any dirty deals around LNG. And that's all I would like to say in terms of an introduction. We will hear more about these dirty details in a minute, and I'm looking forward to our conversation this afternoon. And now back to you, Nadine. Thank you. Well, that's an interesting statement. Dirty details. Mike Sawyer is one of the managers of the Citizens Oil and Gas Council, and he's our first guest. He's an activist from Alberta fighting LNG, and he's active in this field all over Canada when it comes to gas and fracking. It's him, and now the floor is yours.
Thank you for that, Nadine. I'm just going to start up my PowerPoint presentation. Bear with me 1 second, everyone. Okay. So my talk is about Pieridae Energy. It's a small publicly traded Canadian company that is proposing to construct an LNG plant in Goldboro, Nova Scotia on Canada's east coast, and initially to export LNG to Germany and other international markets. Now, Pieridae has signed a sales contract with the German company Uniper, and Pieridae has also tentatively negotiated a $4.5 billion loan guarantee from the German government. If this loan offer is withdrawn, Pieridae's ability to complete the project will be jeopardized. Pieridae has all the necessary regulatory approvals to export LNG from Canada and to construct the Goldboro LNG facility. However, and this is a key point, Pieridae requires sufficient natural gas supply to underpin the Uniper contracts. Pieridae has indicated to the German government that the gas supply will be conventional gas and not fracked gas. However, there is no evidence that Pieridae can source enough conventional gas to meet its contractual obligations to Uniper. An international coalition of over 100 environmental and social justice groups recently sent a letter and a briefing report to the German government that outlined the economic, environmental, and social risks associated with the Pieridae project that make the project, in our view, not in the German or the Canadian public interest. To date, the German government has not responded to that letter. This presentation will provide a brief summary of the factors that the coalition considered in arriving at the conclusion that the Pieridae Goldboro project is not in the German public interest. I'm going to give you a summary of my key conclusions, and they are that if successful, Pieridae scheme will result in Germany supporting the development and importation of fracked gas, that Pieridae will likely default on the German $4.5 billion loan guarantee and or not be able to complete the project. A key part of Pieridae's scheme was to acquire Shell's a portion of Shell Canada's upstream supply, that the construction of the necessary pipelines and meeting the 2025 expiry of its export license are all subject to significant regulatory and public risk and public opposition. And then finally, Pieridae's scheme will result in significant environmental and social costs, including adverse public health effects on endangered species and biodiversity, dramatically increased greenhouse gas emissions, and impacts on Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities. Pieridae proposes to construct 2 liquefaction facilities or trains, each will producing 5 million tons of LNG each year. Production for the first train has been sold to the German utility Uniper in a 20-year binding contract with 10-year extensions. And I understand that this represents 10% of the total total German gas demand. Pieridae states that Alberta will provide the majority of the gas needed for the Uniper contract, and Pieridae has also told the German government and Uniper that the LNG will not be produced using fracked natural gas. And Pieridae is attempting, so far unsuccessfully, to acquire existing conventional natural gas supplies in Alberta and British Columbia. So I have a map here that shows Canada, and on the left side you see the British Columbia and Alberta. The yellow circles are the generalized area where Pieridae will be sourcing their gas, and the blue line is again very generalized, the existing gas gathering and transmission system going over to eastern Canada. And you'll see the blue line more or less ends at Quebec City in Quebec, over in this area. And between this location and Goldboro, which is at the end of this red line here, there is no direct pipeline route. There are some pipelines that come up from the United States, and these are the orange ones here. So in order to get gas from Western Canada over to this area, there's going to be a major pipeline required. Currently, Pieridae has not provided any explanation about how that's going to happen. So we've identified 3 risk factors that potentially affect Pieridae's LNG export scheme: economic risks, regulatory risks, and environmental risks. I'm going to focus for this talk on the first 2, and I'm assuming that most people are reasonably aware of some of the environmental issues around LNG. So I'm just going to touch on those briefly, and majority of my time will be on the first 2 points. Economic risks. Pieridae is a small, inexperienced, and undercapitalized company with significant short-term debt obligations and constrained cash flow. LNG prices need to be over $11 Canadian or higher to be viable, and the current spot market is as low as $2.60. And that, in our current sort of world economy, isn't projected to change very much over the next few years. The Canadian Energy Research Institute, which looked at the economic viability of Canadian LNG, could not find a viable path to lower Eastern Canada project landed costs below the European market price if the project sources gas from Western Canada or the Marcellus shales in the United States. The other factor is that the North American shale boom which has generated this glut of natural gas here, is actually in financial crisis, and many of the fracking companies are at risk or have declared bankruptcy. And another key indicator is that the super majors like Chevron, Shell, British Petroleum have indicated a move away from high-risk LNG export schemes, and they've truncated or stopped some of their investments. So, does Pieridae have what it takes as a small company to pull this project off? The four critical factors that financial analysts consider in assessing the merits of any company are management, experience, qualifications, track record are critically important in assessing the likelihood of success. Share performance, the performance of the company's shares or equity on the market is a key indicator. Ability to raise capital, and specifically the terms under which it can raise capital, i.e. interest rates, etc. And then financial performance. Is the company making a profit or is it losing money? I skipped a slide there, my apologies. Management of Pieridae has a lot of people on it that have experience in the oil and gas industry, but no one on their management team or on their board has experience constructing an LNG facility at all, let alone one of this size. The next thing we look at share performance. Pieridae is listed on the Toronto Stock Exchange, and its shares have declined in value from $34.80 9 years ago to a low of 12 cents a few months ago. This shows the market's interpretation of how likely they are to succeed. Pieridae is currently trading at approximately 42 cents Canadian. Their ability to raise capital. I seem to have a problem with my slides, so I'll just talk about the ability to raise capital. The Pieridae has raised some money through a number of different sources, and last year they raised $220 million in order to buy Shell Canada's assets, and we'll get to that in just a few moments. And to put that into context, that loan, they were paying 15% per annum on that money. And in a global money environment where we're looking at 0 or less than 1% interest rates on most consumer loans, a 15% rate is extremely high. And what that means is that on an annual basis, Pieridae is going to have to pay over $30 million a year just in interest to service that loan. And for a small company that probably is more than 5 years away from having the LNG project successful, if in fact they are successful, that is a very major burden. So then the last point is financial performance. In 2019, Pieridae reported a $70 million loss on revenues of $110 million. And in 2019, looking at the first quarter, they reported liabilities totaling $498 million, which included the $202 million in long-term debt. If you look at the first 2 quarters of 2020, Pieridae's reported a $25 million loss on revenues of $142 and liabilities of $509, which include $210 million in long-term debt. what's really important to remember here is that Pieridae in these 2019-2020 financial numbers is including all of the sales that they got from the Shell assets. What's important to know here is that that sale was actually rejected by the Alberta Energy Regulator, but Pieridae has not adjusted its financial statements to reflect that they do not own those assets or are entitled to those revenues. In the end, Pieridae's financial performance is much, much worse than what their financial reporting indicates. So what are the regulatory risks? The purchase and development of the Shell natural gas assets is indefinitely stalled. There's a serious supply risk because of the requirement and commitment that the gas has to be conventional versus fracked natural gas. That's going to create a major problem for Pieridae. Another key point is that their export license, excuse me, expires in less than 5 years if exports haven't commenced. And given the amount of work and construction and other things that Pieridae has to accomplish in the next 5 years, it's very unlikely that's going to happen. Another major issue is that there's no continuous pipeline access from Western Canada to the Goldboro, Nova Scotia site. And Pieridae will require new pipeline access through Quebec, which will be subject to significant public opposition. And then finally, we live in a world where we have rapidly changing regulatory and public policy context with respect to global warming at provincial, national, and global scales. And we're talking about a project here that will have a 40-year lifespan if it's successful. So these are all things that are very challenging risks that Pieridae has to deal with. So let's just talk about the purchase of the Shell assets, which is critical to Pieridae's scheme because they need to get a source of natural gas that they can claim, even if it's not entirely true, that they can claim is conventional. So in late 2019, Pieridae acquired all of Shell Canada's midstream and upstream assets in the southern Alberta foothills for $190 million. And just so the backstory in this is, Shell's tried to sell these because these are the 3 gas plants that are involved are some of the oldest, if not the oldest, gas plants in Alberta or in Canada. And there's enormous environmental liability with those. If Shell can offload them to a small rinky-dink company like Pieridae, they get out of what could be, many, many hundreds of $millions of environmental liability. So that's what Shell's motivation is. Pieridae's motivation is to acquire a source of gas. What they got was 114 million cubic feet a day of natural gas production, 3 very old sour gas processing plants, and over 200 sour gas wells, and approximately 1,700 kilometers of gathering pipelines. The proposed Pieridae Shell acquisition created significant backlash here in Alberta, not because of the LNG project, but because of the potential that the taxpayers would be put on the hook for the cleanup liabilities associated with these facilities when Pieridae eventually goes bankrupt. And in response to public opposition in May of 2020, the Alberta Energy Regulator denied the Shell Pieridae application to transfer the assets. As of October of this year, neither Shell nor Pieridae has reapplied to the AER. So that's been denied. The takeaway point on this is Pieridae does not have enough conventional natural gas.
Mike, can you mute your telephone, please?
Stand by 1 second. Okay. The takeaway point is that Pieridae does not have enough conventional natural gas to meet its obligation. The failed Shell asset would have only added 114. If we subtract out what Shell would have brought, it means that Pieridae only has about 90 million cubic feet a day of production. That's an 89% shortfall from the requirements of the Uniper contract. The other thing to keep in mind is that natural gas sourced from the Western Sedimentary Basin or Western Canada or the northeastern U.S. In the Marcellus shales have a significant portion of frack gas, and that's just increasing. And according to other sources, financial analyst sources, Purity will likely seek to supply 50% of the natural gas and source the remaining through the North American gas grid. So if we look at the Canadian production, in 2018, and it's probably slightly higher now, 75% of all natural gas produced in Canada is from fracked wells. It's projected that by 2040, fracked gas will amount to 83% of all natural gas produced in Canada. Again, most of it being produced in Western Canada. The key takeaway point is there's no technically feasible way to differentiate fracked versus non-fracked gas. If you imagine, and here's a picture of a gas field in Alberta, hundreds of wells hooked into hundreds of kilometers of gathering lines going to multiple gas plants, which all get dumped into a regional distribution system, which then get piped in transmission lines to the markets, let's say in Eastern Canada. Once all that gas gets mingled and commingled, there is absolutely no way to differentiate whether you're conventional or frack gas. For the purposes of the pipeline, it's all methane, and you cannot differentiate those molecules. So in the absence of Purity having a very clearly defined source of conventional gas, which they do not, you will be very certain that you will be receiving some portion, according to the numbers, 83% of the gas will be fracked. Another key issue is Purity's export license will expire, as we've mentioned. If they do not commence exports by the expiry date, they run the risk of losing their license. If you think of everything they have to do between now and then, that's a very big challenge. And given Purity's financial capabilities and the economic and environmental risks associated with the project, I think achieving first exports before August 2025 is highly unlikely. No pipeline access. We've talked about this. I'm going to skip by. One thing that's interesting is no pipeline company has publicly indicated that they either have firm transportation agreements or are negotiating with Purity to construct the 420-kilometer natural gas pipeline that would likely be needed to connect Western Canada. The cost of that pipeline is approximately $3.6 billion, and Purity has never explained publicly how they intend to get natural gas from Western Canada to Goldboro, or explain how they would finance the construction of that pipeline. And purchasing natural gas, the northern U.S. will not satisfy the requirement for conventional gas because most of the gas from the Marcellus Shale play is, in fact, frack gas. Just very briefly, you know, there are impacts on Indigenous communities. In spite of years of rhetoric and broken promises, Canada still has a systemic racism towards Indigenous communities. We have accepted the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, but it has no force of law and it's not followed. And if some of you are following the news, you saw the assaults on the Wet'suwet'en people. That's not the only case in Canada, but it's one example. The Purity's project will affect Indigenous communities in British Columbia, Alberta, Quebec, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia. The environmental risks I'm not going to cover in any detail other than mentioning them because I'm assuming most people here are going to be aware of them. Upstream effects of fracking, greenhouse gas and global warming. Purity's natural gas will include a significant amount of frack gas, and importing cheap subsidized LNG into the German-Europe market undermines the need for urgent transition to renewables and demand-side management initiatives. There's a typical fracked well in northern BC. One of the things here is that when you look at life cycle costs on LNG, the carbon intensity is 28% higher than coal, and one would expect that shipping gas to Nova Scotia would be similar or higher. Summary: if successful, Purity scheme will result in supporting the development and importation of frack gas. Purity will likely default on the proposed German $4.5 billion loan guarantee and or not be able to complete the project. Acquisition of upstream supply assets, construction of pipelines, and meeting the 2000 expiry of its export license are all subject to significant regulatory risk and public opposition. And there's all of the environmental effects. Key takeaway messages. Purity requires $4.4 million loan from the German government in order to advance its project. If Germany considers all the risk factors and decides not to provide the loan guarantee, the project is unlikely to proceed. I'd like to acknowledge all my co-conspirators, and that's it in my presentation. Thank you.
Vielen herzlichen Dank, Mike.
Thank you very much, Mike. Thank you very much. Just in time, so no problem. You finished on time. Great, thank you very much. So there were lots of figures. This was an overview over the situation on the other side of the Atlantic. However, it was very interesting to see how a small company is obviously supported with German funding and buying old plants from Shell, but maybe this was only my understanding because it's the first time that I've heard about that. So now I would like to bring in Regine Richter. She works at Urgewalt. I've known her for approximately 25 years, I think. And the NGO Urgewalt predominantly works on sustainable funding, but not exclusively. And Regine is also an expert for untied loan guarantees. And what this is will be explained by her in her presentation, because I don't think that everybody knows what it is. She brought along some slides and she will give an input on the role of Germany, the German state-owned bank KfW, and the exports of LNG. Regine, you have the floor. Thank you very much. I will try to start my presentation and share my screen, and I hope that this is going to work out. Can you see my screen? Okay, great. Well, hello once again to everyone, and I would like to take a look at this side of the Atlantic and our responsibility for this project. I would also like to explain some background, so what all this is about and what these untied loan guarantees actually are. So if we take a look at the German stakeholders who have a connection to Goldboro, then it is Uniper on the one hand with its long-term contract that they have concluded to buy this gas. Then we have the untied loan guarantees where there's so-called letter of intent or letter of interest, and I will explain that in a minute, and also the role of the KfW IPEX bank, which is also involved here. I'll start with Uniper. I mean, Uniper has been mentioned several times already. Uniper is an energy utility in Germany, which is reducing the share of coal in its mix. However, they expand the share of gas, and they are doing this by also expanding the share of LNG in their business. And they have a 20-year supply agreement with Pieridae that they concluded. And on an annual basis, they want to buy all the LNG that is coming from the first train. So far, there have been some delays in the project, but the plans now are that the first gas is being delivered in 2026. And then for a period of 20 years, they want to buy this gas. So this means LNG is supposed to be delivered up until 2045 or 2046. However, this is in contradiction to Uniper's statement that they want to be climate neutral until 2035. So it's not quite clear how they want to deal with this contradiction that they still have to buy LNG gas for another 10 years after they want to be climate neutral. We also ask our Canadian colleagues how Uniper perceives the financial risk of this project, and they replied that, well, we do not have a financial risk. We simply concluded a purchase contract, and either the gas is coming or it's not. And whether Pieridae has financial difficulties or not is not really relevant for us. The next thing is it's about the export promotion scheme or foreign trade and investment promotion scheme. And this is a picture from the official web page on investment promotion from the federal government. And this basically says that if an exporter here on the right-hand side of the picture wants to do business and wants to sell something to the person on the left, they can hedge their project through state guarantees. And this means for the bank that is the intermediary that they can be quite happy because either way, the project will be funded and they can offer a good deal. And this basically allows the exporter to make a good offer in the bidding process. And this is part of the official explanatory video of this portal. And I think it would make sense if I explained what Hermes or export guarantees actually are in comparison to the untied loan guarantees. And in terms of these export guarantees or Hermes guarantees, an exporter of pipes would like, for example, to export these pipes to Turkey, and the potential buyer wants to get a good offer. And then, of course, you can apply for an export guarantee, and then this is being checked whether you are entitled to support or to these guarantees, whether it's legal, or what are the environmental implications, or environmental impact, or also social impact. And Hermes is a company, private-run company in Hamburg, situated in Hamburg. However, they work in connection with the federal government. They do the initial checking, and then they make a proposal to the federal government, and the commission set up by the BMZ, the Economics Ministry and the Finance Ministry, will then decide whether such a guarantee is being provided. And if they provide such a guarantee, then of course this helps the exporter to get a better loan from a bank with lower interest rates, and the exporter is then able to make a better offer to the potential buyer. So this is basically a state side insurance for the exporter. The exporters, of course, have to pay a fee for it. However, it's basically a transfer of risks to the federal government or the federal budget. And in terms of the untied loan guarantees, they predominantly focus on what is inside of the pipelines, so the raw materials. So here you're entitled to get a guarantee if you deal with raw materials that are important for Germany, so raw materials that the economy is interested in, so to speak, and which secures supply, and then you might get such an untied loan guarantee. In the case of Uniper, this means that if Uniper has a long-term gas purchase agreement, then of course this contributes to the diversification of the German gas market. This is part of an answer of the federal government to a small request at Parliament, and this makes it eligible for these kind of guarantees. And this is like a overview coming from the federal government once again, and this means in concrete terms that Uniper has a long-term contract with Pieridae on gas deliveries, and as the project operator, they can get a loan from a bank, and this loan is being hedged by the German government, and this means that the risk for the German bank is much lower. However, we also have to say that, I mean, all this is possible. This has not yet been done like that. I mean, Pieridae has or acts in Canada as if they already received the funding, and they tend to point to the fact that they've got a letter of interest for such a Uniper guarantee. And they do have this since 2013. However, on this side of the Atlantic, it sounds a little bit different. I mean, there have been some requests in the German Bundestag. Is it already implemented? Is it being supported? And the answer of the federal government is quite clear. There is a letter of interest, but there's no guarantee yet. And such a letter of interest simply says that such an application can be reviewed. This is not legally binding, but this does neither mean that it cannot be reviewed or approved.
Now the next player is the KfW, and they are usually funding the insulation of buildings or solar roofs. And of course, KfW is a whole group, which also includes the Mittelstandsbank and the IPEX Bank, which helps fund projects in order to promote the German economy. Now, KfW IPEX supports the Goldboro project. They act as consultants. And when the federal government was asked in Parliament, the answer was this is about the optimum use of LNG as an alternative to other fossil fuels and an attempt to help diversify the European supply with gas. There is a consultancy agreement, that is to say, with the KfW IPEX, and they might be the bank who later finance the Goldboro project, but this isn't clear yet. It may be assumed, but we don't know. It's an assumption, but it's a close guess, so to speak. Now, what does all this mean in terms of conclusion? We'd have to say that the funding of Goldboro and the decision about funding has been postponed time and again, which shows that it's a bit difficult to get the funds, but the Société Générale and IPEX are involved. That is two banks who act as advisors, and they are both working on the project. Now, right now, there is no UFK guarantee yet. There is no untied financial loan guarantee yet, but the banks are involved, which has helped keep an otherwise struggling project alive. And this is doubt-worthy in terms of the German politics and also in terms of the Canadian policy, because we will be bound by this project for many years. So we need to be against this project. And we also need to make sure that when it comes to the promotion of business abroad, the aspect of climate protection must matter too. The ministries who decide about FDI and other monies thus need to base their decisions on a climate protection approach. And that's all from my side. Thank you, Regina. So let's meet at our round table. Konstantin Serger, Mike Sawyer, Regine Richter will be part of our panel discussion, and Jim Emberger too. Jim, briefly. He's a spokesperson for the New Brunswick Anti-Shale Gas Alliance, the NBASGA. And after many years, this initiative has been quite successful in a trial against the provincial government, and they also convinced a majority of the need to have an embargo on fracking in 2015. Now, a number of questions have been submitted already, but I would like to start off, and I would like to ask Jim first, because the others have spoken already. What is the connection between fracking and LNG exports? What's your perception of the current projects?
Well, and certainly in this part of Canada,
Nun, in diesem Teil Kanadas.
LNG export would by definition include fracking, because all the gas around here comes from fracking. And of course, we're primarily concerned about that both the leaks of methane from fracking wells and the leaks of methane from LNG terminals are two of the largest sources of the hugely dangerous methane leaks that are driving climate change at the moment. So that's how the two are related. And we have a little experience here too, in that there was an LNG import terminal, and still is, in New Brunswick, but it's vastly underused. And so there were moves by the owners to try and turn it into an export terminal itself. But for the moment, at least, we seem to have squashed that idea as well, primarily because the cost involved was deemed to make the project uneconomical.
Vielen Dank dafür.
Thank you for your statement.
Das ist die erste Frage aus dem Chat. Ich muss kurz in den Chat switchen. Die Frage ist, auf welche Art und Weise fordert die deutsche Regierung ein?
Now, how does the German government make sure that imported gas is conventional ones? Who would like to answer? Well, there is no contract yet. Right now, they are negotiating. Thus, the government cannot claim or make sure that it's conventional gas. And an application hasn't been made yet. But honestly, I don't know whether the German government would really have a close look at the clauses. We asked Uniper, what about the proportion of fracked gas? And they said at the general meeting, we buy the gas, and if the seller says it's not fracked, we believe it. And otherwise, there is not much we can do. I mean, we don't double check. They don't double check, that is. And I'm not sure whether I'd really trust that the German government would double check. Mike, you wanted to answer?
Yeah, so several years ago, Canada's national regulator was looking at this question in a slightly different context, and they came up with what they called the direct connection test. And essentially what they arrived at, the conclusion was, is when you co-mingle gas from literally hundreds of thousands of wells into the pipeline and processing system, that it's impossible to identify where that particular molecule of methane comes from. So if 85% of the Western Sedimentary Basin, which is where the gas is coming from, is produced from frack gas and it all gets commingled, there actually is no way to tell where that gas comes from. You might be saying it's non-fracked, but there's absolutely no way to prove it. And there's a high level of certainty that you will be receiving frack gas. So that's an aside from the contractual side of it and the political side of it, but on a practical, physical basis, there's no way not to have frack gas.
Konstantin, du wolltest dazu was sagen?
Ja, ich bin mir auch gar nicht sicher, ob die Bundesregierung überhaupt.
No, I'm not sure whether the federal government wants to do without fracked gas. With respect to Goldboro, maybe they would like to do without it, but if you look at other fields, I mean, import terminals are a major means to go and open the North American market, and the goal of opening the market is certainly the import of fracking gas. People tell us that they don't want to import fracking gas and they would like to import clean energy. But I think secretly, this is the true motivation.
Okay. Spannend, sehr spannend. Ich habe aber noch nicht ganz
Interesting.
verstanden, das war auch vorhin, als ich Regine angekündigt habe. Und
But I'm not quite sure whether I
ich glaube, so ein leichtes Stirnrunzeln, weil ich
understood correctly, because all these connections between Pieridae, Unper, and others, I mean, I'm the host of this debate and I am allowed to ask a question. I am still not quite understood how the connection is, what connections there are. Mike, please. In order to make this project economically viable or worthwhile, and then you say there is a kind of remnant, a terminal which is underused and which is meant to be used more, and there are contracts. And I mean, why does Pieridae agree to all these ideas? Maybe all the others have understood why, but I haven't understood why. Why does the company agree to get involved in spite of the fact that they can't expect much profit and the risk is really high? I mean, there's also risk for the German taxpayer, but for the Canadian company, first and foremost, right?
So the simple answer to a complex question is that some people view Pieridae, and in particular Pieridae's the lead person in Pieridae, Sorensen. He's got a long track record, and he's a self-admitted salesman. And so a lot of people would look at this as simply just a stock promotion play. If we really look at the facts, it's highly unlikely this will come to fruition. But along the way, if the people involved can make a lot of money and put that money in their pockets, then they've succeeded. So when you look at larger companies like Chevron and Shell's and the BPs, when they're saying we're withdrawing from large investments in LNG in Canada, or they're truncating those. So the majors are saying, hey, this doesn't make sense. And so the question, why does a little rinky-dink company like Pieridae keep pursuing it? I think the logical conclusion is that this is a stock promotion play. And there was a question that came up in the answer, and I'd just like to bring it up. Is, if that's the case, why are we even bothered about this? And I'll tell you why I think it's a case. This is sort of like a beachhead for LNG imports into Germany and Europe. And if we just let this slide and we don't pay attention to it, and they are successful, because Sorensen's a very skilled, I mean, I don't know the man. I suspect I wouldn't like him personally, but I have some respect because he's really pulling off an amazing feat here if he can pull it off. I think we need to get out in front of this one, stop it, raise the arguments that will set the precedent for next project and the next project, rather than letting this one slide. So I think it's very important that we go after this and take advantage of the fact that there are some apparent weaknesses here. And if we're successful, we're going to be educating the companies, we're going to be educating the governments, and that will help us in the future on future proposals. I'm not sure that answered your question, but that's the best I could do.
Ich kann ja noch mal ein bisschen nachhaken. Danke, Mike, für den Moment.
Well, thank you, Mike, for the time being. But I mean, does this mean that the majors say don't go fracking and LNG, but Pieridae does it because the boss is eager to do it because he wants to do it? And I mean, what does it mean with respect to American gas prices? I mean, is the gas price the criterion he uses in order to say, yes, we do it?
If I can jump in, yeah, it's a good example of the volatility of the whole gas market and why it's so risky. The terminal in New Brunswick that I mentioned was built, 10 years ago. And at that point, it was because America was running out of gas and thought they'd be importing gas from, all over the rest of the world. And then suddenly the fracking boom came along, and all the financial assumptions that underpinned this multi-billion-dollar project suddenly disappeared overnight. And the same thing could happen at, now with this export terminal, given the changing energy dynamic due to climate change and the changes that the world is making, to meet that. And if you listen to Sorensen, the head of Pieridae, and his own actual pitch in some of his press releases, he admits that there are projects being canceled all over the world, Australia, Argentina, and many other places, and that the price of gas is cratering. And he looks at that and he says, now it's the perfect time to get into the market. That's the sort of ploy of a small time, I don't know, for want of a better word, flim-flammer. He's trying to drive, as Mike said, it's a stock move. It's got nothing to do with oil and gas and energy. It's got to do with a chance to make some money off of someone who's willing to make an investment, based on what's a faulty argument. There's really is no compelling reason for this project to take place, but he's going to frame it as a way to, this now's the time to do it because everybody else is leaving the market. We should get in. I mean, it's just absurd on the face of it. I mean, which is why all the big people like Shell and everybody else is leaving that market. And the people who are staying, like Exxon, just again, I think this week reported another quarterly loss. So the guys who are saying, like he is, that it's a market to stay in, are losing their shirts.
Möchte da jemand was ergänzen? Vielleicht Sabine, Konstantin.
Sabine, Konstantin, would you like to add something? How do you perceive this situation? And what does this mean for the federal government? And what do we need to do in order to push the German government into the right direction?
Also ich meine, auf der deutschen Seite, also im Prinzip werden Projekte ja durchaus auf
basically projects are double-checked in terms of their viability. And this might also be a result of many years of campaigns in the past. A lot of money was given for white elephants. Lots of projects were sponsored because they were part of the budget of the German government. This has changed. In the 1980s, this was often the case, but in the last few years, it has changed. And of course, we need to have a critical look at the projects on the table today. Now, the government argues we need to diversify our gas supply, and Canada is a good idea in this respect, they say. But you say the white elephant was in the room in the past. What has changed? Has the situation improved? Do people have a closer look at what the situation is?
Well, I think also in discussions, I mean, we did a lot on these Hermes guarantees, these export guarantees, and people from Hermes sometimes said for one or the other project that, I mean, these were absurd airport projects in Cameroon, for example, where it was quite foreseeable that it has no future, that it's not viable, that it's only interesting for very few people. Then my impression was that nowadays people take a closer look, and this is not being generally supported. And this is also due to the fact that there's more questions coming in the parliament from the public, from the general public. So I would actually concede that to the federal government. So as a summary, climate criteria play a minor role, or are these different criteria? Well, I was just talking about the funding or financial viability of projects. In terms of climate questions, well, they do play a role in the field of coal. I mean, coal-fired power plants can no longer be provided with guarantees. However, in terms of gas, we are still at the beginning of the discussion, and it is considered much less critical than coal, for example. And I do think that we have a lot to do and a long way to go also as climate activists. Konstantin, question to you. What can climate activists or the climate movement do so that Hermes or other banks are being convinced that fossil gas is similar to coal? Well, I think at the beginning, I think it's a little bit bizarre that a businessman thinks that a business can make money by investing in a fossil fuel. And at the beginning, I already said it, these projects, these plants have a long lifespan. And the point of time where we have to be climate neutral is much earlier. So this might mean two things. Either they don't think that our climate targets are to be taken seriously, or they think that someone will actually will help them when they have to withdraw from the project at one point of time. So I personally cannot understand why someone can still take so much money and put it into such a project. What we as a movement or activists or NGOs or also scientists can do is that we have to point to it and emphasize that these kind of projects, and we already know this today, do not fit into the energy scenarios that are compatible to our climate objectives. They cannot, they must not be economically viable, because otherwise we are faced with a much bigger problem. What is happening, what I do see in Wilhelmshaven and Brunsbüttel and also in Stade now, is that people are increasingly aware of it, and they become active locally. They get together, and it's increasingly a very critical public in terms of the role of natural gas. And this is something that we have to continue and foster, but we also have to explain to the natural gas industry that it's no longer part of the solution, but part of the problem now. And from a German perspective, I mean, we agreed on a withdrawal from coal way too late, but we decided on the coal phase out. And so this means that the dirtiest fuel is now handing over the baton to gas now. Of course, it's also in their interest that we explain it to them, because when they make investments that their shareholders in the end do not like, it means that they would lose a lot of money in the end. Thank you very much for that. In terms of the climate objectives, I mean, you just talked about the local LNG sites in Germany. My question goes to Jim. How about the climate objectives of New Brunswick, and how about the local situation there? Can you talk a little bit about that? And also from the perspective, I mean, you cooperated with many local initiatives. So what's their perspective, or what is your experience, and what can you tell us as a take-home message, or what can we learn from you?
There were two questions there, and I missed the first one. I listened to the second one. Can you repeat your first question?
The first question refers to your climate objectives in New Brunswick.
Yeah.
What is happening there?
I got you. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Yeah. New Brunswick is a very small province in terms of population, but it is also home to the largest oil refinery on the east coast of North America. And it also still gets a fair amount of its electricity from coal-fired plants. And so it is in real trouble trying to meet any kind of climate obligations. They sort of are barely doing it now, but the obligations that they have are so weak that they almost are laughable, you know. So any new project that would increase, emissions here in any way Now, if it was just a pipeline passing through, it might not have a problem. But if it involves starting up of a fracking industry of any kind, they would immediately put all our climate objectives into question, for sure. And someone else can speak to Nova Scotia, perhaps, but I think that where the plant is going to be has a much greater problem with that. In terms of what our experience in New Brunswick can teach people is that our successful moratorium was a product really of something that was said to us at the very beginning 10 years ago by states in the United States who had lost their battle against stopping fracking industry. And what they said was, you have to stop it right away. You have to nip it in the bud. You have to throw everything you can at it before it gets started, because once it gets started, the combination of money and political power makes it almost impossible to slow down. So that's what we did. And so we did everything from the usual activist things like, rallies and marches and lobbying and petitions, etc. But we also followed that up with civil disobedience, which also largely involved much of the indigenous groups in New Brunswick, since it was their land they were protecting. New Brunswick is considered non-ceded First Nations land here in Canada. So we had civil disobedience, there were blockades of company trucks, and then at the same time, we went the legal route and we filed a lawsuit against the government for allowing us to go forward. And the combination of all those forces finally ended up actually getting rid of the current government, and there was a commission set up which ended up giving us a moratorium. Now that moratorium can be reversed by the next government, but we have already put out there that we have the funds that we've kept from last time. We have the lawyers. We're ready to go back to court. So the point to sum that all up is that it's got, whenever these things, because a lot of them happen in the out of the daylight, in back rooms between bankers and politicians, et cetera, is that you have to do the full court press to get it into the public's eyes, and they will put the heat on the government, hopefully because of financial things, but also the effects of fracking, because unlike when we had our battle 5 years ago, the documentation of all the environmental and particularly health aspects of fracking these days are so well documented that if you get it to a public forum, it's almost impossible for the government to defend it. So that's the important thing, is to get it out in the public eye. And with a project like this, that's a little more difficult to do because they're not talking about at this point drilling a well in somebody's backyard or anything. So it's a harder sell to get it into the media. But I think that's where it has to go.
Okay, danke dafür. Ich glaube, Konstantin, wir
Thank you
sind
very much, Konstantin. I think we are on a good track. It sounds good. We did many of those things that Jim just mentioned. And Mike, you wanted to add something.
Yes, thank you. Sort of as an overarching concept, one of the problems that we have is that for the last 60 years or so, the natural gas industry in North America and globally has promoted natural gas as an environmentally friendly fuel and a bridging fuel to some future state. And if they look at just the burner tip emissions, they're probably right. But when you actually look at on a life cycle basis in terms of the upstream processing, all of the emissions that result in the entire supply chain, when that analysis happens, it actually is at minimum equal to coal, and in some situations, particularly in Western Canada, it's worse than coal. So this mythology that gas is an environmentally friendly fuel, it gets repeated over and over and over again by the promoters of gas projects. And I think it would behoove us to have a really clear message that mythology is simply not true. And I think that in that context, I think that if the German government was being honest with themselves and looking at these facts, and if they believed that natural gas was equivalent to coal or worse, they wouldn't be making these kind of decisions. And I think that that's an important message that should underpin everything we do. That it's just, I call it the big lie, because it's just not true.
Bedeutet das denn, dass diese große
Does
Lüge
this mean that this big lie or this big lack of knowledge is the origin or the reason why the discussions around gas have not yet reached the financial world? So everyone wants to phase out coal, everyone, or some at least, phase out nuclear power, but gas is still hyped. It's the wonderful bridge technology, as you just mentioned. In the end, it's just another dirty fuel. But why is the knowledge not there? Don't we know enough about it, or are they so good at concealing these facts? So I would like to hear all four of you about that, and I would like to start with you, Regine. Well, I think we should be a little bit self-critical. In Germany, there was a focus on it, rightly so. We had a big problem with coal, and we had to do something about coal. We had to get rid of coal, and there was this strong focus. Well, we are doing coal, and we do not want to talk about gas. But in the meantime, the gas industry did a good job. They managed to describe themselves as a solution. There were huge advertising campaigns in which they said, well, we are the solution to the climate change, and the critical aspects are being neglected. They completely neglect that new gas infrastructure that is being built is, of course, a long-term thing, and that this means that we will remain in this fossil business, or fossil fuel business. And this strong focus, of course, is also a German thing. It's different in some other countries where coal did not play such a major role. There, the discussion around gas has been done in a different way. But I think in Germany, we have to catch up in this regard. We have to get there as well. We now have to say, well, we focused a lot on coal, but now we realize that to change from coal to gas is not the solution. And this is what we still have to work on. Well, I would like to stay in Germany. Konstantin, what's your view on that? Well, I think there are two reasons why the gas industry thinks that they can still continue. One thing is that we are not loud enough. I think that we as a movement, as climate activists, have to make ourselves heard even better, and we have to explain ourselves even better what the problem is, and we have to articulate the problems. This is one thing. And the second problem is that there's so much money involved. So if I take a look at the German situation, I mean, there were new subsidies that were introduced for the construction of new gas-fired power plants in the course of the coal phase out. And currently, I get higher subsidies for fossil natural gas than renewables. So there's this huge pressure that the costs of also the subsidies for renewables is going down. But on the other hand, the federal government is spending a lot of money or providing a lot of money for subsidizing gas-fired power plants. So this is simply a wrong policy. And I think it cannot be accepted that in the 21st century, we are still talking about subsidies for fossil fuels. So I think this is actually something that should be spent on renewables. And there we need a change, a major change in our policy, that all these subsidies for fossil fuels are being cut, and that the taxpayers' money is being diverted to renewables. Thank you very much. Now, I would like to go to Canada and to you, Jim, and ask you, I mean, you said it yourself in your last contribution that the government actually could overturn the moratorium against fracking, the moratorium that you achieved. So what does this mean? Don't you have to fight for the maintenance of the moratorium, or that everyone in the new or old government is actually being informed and educated in terms of the situation surrounding gas?
Oh yeah, you're quite right. It's one of those things that, you know, you can never sleep. Any day the government could get an offer to like start fracking here again, and they might consider it, which is why we just keep them on notice. Besides lobbying the government, also writing to the local media and all, letting them know that if they were to start something, the next day they would be in court because, we would plan to sue them. There's also a big, in this province in particular, the Indigenous people are very much opposed, and there is a lot of political goings on with the Indigenous people in New Brunswick right now. So I don't think the government wants to take that on. So that's a good thing for us right now. And the government seems to have been given up on fracking and is now moving to what may be a better or worse thing. And they're talking about developing small modular nuclear reactors. But that's a story for another time. But in the national scene, the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, CAP, as it's called, is a very wealthy, well-organized political media machine. And just like in the United States and in Europe, I assume, they keep pushing these projects. There's a large part of the Canadian economy, particularly in Western Canada, that is based on oil and gas. And so, there's a lot of headwinds. Our our prime minister rather, Justin Trudeau, is pretty much pulled in two because he wants to be a climate warrior and supposedly is coming out with some new things to advance that. But at the same time, he has been known to be subsidizing the very industries that, he talks about in his speeches about stopping climate change. So I think that's probably not too much different than the way it is in Germany. You have those two competing interests now. It really is a battle royale for the sort of the soul of the nations. And I'm not sure, what the answer is. One likes to think that with the climate becoming so much more of an issue that eventually, sanity will prevail. But right now it's an open battle. And even within the provinces, I mean, it's very weird. You have British Columbia and Alberta both in court on the same side in one case, on different side in the other case, because one of them likes tar sands but doesn't want natural gas. The other one has natural gas but doesn't want tar sands. It's very complicated. So until we get to that point where we definitely move entirely off the carbon fuels, I think that it's going to be, as you say, constantly a battle.
Mike, möchten Sie
Mike?
ergänzen?
Would you like to comment on that or add to that?
I think that, I mean, Jim's right. I mean, Canada has a peculiar political structure where the decisions with respect to natural resources, and particularly oil and gas, are constitutionally provided to the provinces. And as a national government, we don't have the ability to make decisions about those resources. There are some exceptions. And so our constitutional structure has created a real dog's breakfast when it comes to dealing with issues like climate change, which have national and global implications. And so it becomes very problematic in Canada. So yeah, Jim's right, and I think the way we need to deal with this, and getting back to the issue of the overarching issue around gas not being environmentally friendly, is I think that we need to, in all of our work and in all of our efforts, we need to hammer home that point that gas, and not just frack gas, but all natural gas. I mean, frack gas is worse, but all natural gas is in many cases worse than coal, and we need to keep singing that song in all of our work. So those are my comments on that.
Okay. Bevor ich sozusagen schon fast die Abschlussrunde
Now,
starte,
before I invite you to contribute to the final round, I'd like to
einmal an Regine.
introduce two questions from the chat. One for Regine. Is it probable that the federal government also sponsors a terminal in Russia? Regina.
Konstantin, du kriegst die zweite.
And the second question is for Konstantin, by the way.
Also da geht es nicht um eine ungebundene Finanzkreditgarantie.
Now, this is not about a UFK guarantee. This is about a Hermes guarantee. Of course, it's still foreign trade funding. Now, the advantage of the latter project is that we got a lot of information in due time, and the media were informed too. So I'm kind of optimistic with respect to the Russian project, because it's different from a debate behind closed doors. But there is no guarantee, of course. And maybe the federal government says, we'll do what we promised to do, and we acknowledge that it's a major problem how Russia deals with critics, and thus we need to decide differently. But as I said, there is no decision yet. But there are interesting debates going on. Now, the second question from the chat is the following. Can the German government support the project, because this project would help us overcome Russian gas, and also because it's climate neutral and it creates jobs, especially in Wilhelmshaven? Well, let me think about it. Now, this is not about substituting one delivery of gas by another. This is about avoiding dependencies. We will need natural gas for a certain time, temporarily. We cannot just switch it off. Thus, it's much more about preventing new projects which have a lifespan that exceeds the climate neutrality period. So it doesn't make sense to build a terminal in order to reduce the gas imports from Russia. We should rather make sure that imports are organized as clean as possible. And I also expect transparency from Russia with respect to methane. We know quite a bit about this aspect from the United States, but we don't know anything about it if it comes to Russia. So we need to see the whole value chain, and we are not insinuating that one gas should displace another gas, but we need renewable energy sources. And this should be our strategy. And by the way, talking about jobs, there will be jobs in this approach as well. I mean, you might build a terminal, but you don't need many people to run it. Now, if you go for a strategy of local added value. You should rather focus on energy efficiency and new energy or renewables, especially in northern Germany. There is a lot of decentralized activity going on, and it's also supporting minor trades and small regional structures. And this is much better than major investments
Danke für die Antwort.
and big projects.
Hat diese Antwort auch gereicht? Wenn nicht, Sie wissen, wie Sie Konstantin Zerger erreichen können. Schlussworte.
Now, concluding remarks. We are dealing with transatlantic chains or connections, which is actually the title of this conference. What are you interested in when talking about connections or interconnections? Now, what would be your recommendations for the federal government? I would like to ask Mike first, and then Jim, and then the others.
My recommendation for the German government is to ensure that they inform themselves fully about all of the risk factors involved in Pieridae's scheme. Pieridae has not been forthcoming with a lot of those matters to the, I mean, just for example, this notion that they're going to use conventional gas is clearly rubbish. I mean, they can't do it. And yet the German government has not, I mean, to the best of my knowledge, fully informed themselves of that. And so I think that if the German government fully informs themselves of all the risk factors, they will recognize that that German money, the German taxpayers' money, is at risk, and they will not offer the loan guarantee. And I believe when they don't offer the loan guarantee, the project will fail.
And I guess this it's down to me. I pretty much would just agree with everything that Mike just said. I think, you know, looking at the grounds for pushing this project that that Pieridae is quoting about, you know, the market is so bad and people are going bankrupt, now is the best time to get into the market. I mean, I think that's something that we hope that people of financial stature in the German government will understand is more of a racketeering approach to things than an actual serious energy proposal. And the only thing I would say is that, you know, Germany here on this side of the Atlantic, at least in our provinces anyway, is often held up as an example of good climate and energy policy. Because of what they've done with renewables over the years and their stated climate goals, you know, which exceed a lot of the other countries around the world, and so it's sort of held up as a good example, and this just sort of would, you know, sort of dim that public perception of them as being sort of climate hypocrites, whereas they would ban, you know, fracking in their own country, but wouldn't mind, you know, imposing all the health and environmental destruction on, you know, people here in Canada. And so I think that's a real, you know, public relations consideration.
Sehr charmant. Regine.
Ja, ich würde mir konkret wünschen, dass es
Well, I'd love to see no support for Goldboro in the German government. They should say no. And when it comes to the establishment of new infrastructure, the German government should offer support. And concerning the question how to avoid that new fossil infrastructures are being established, we should reinitiate the debate about climate, the climate. Well, I'm still pondering the question answered by Jim, especially concerning the image or reputation of the German government or Germany actually it looks different seen from within Germany. And it's interesting to see how Germany is perceived in other countries, but it's truly sad what has happened with respect to wind energy and the expansion of power networks and grids, and we are opting out of coal and lignite much too late. There is no real phase out, and we are still building motorways. And there is a long list, and I could go on and on. So the situation as seen within Germany is different from what you might perceive abroad. But of course, we are talking about the protection of the climate. We do have a lot of evidence that the German government, however, claims to protect the climate and still sponsor the automotive industry and the gas and coal industry, which is not punished for wrong decisions, but which is being pampered, which gets a lot of tax money, and which gets a lot of subsidies. And this is a disastrous balance, if you ask me. And now if it comes to these LNG terminals, people once again should have a closer look at how wrong decisions are being taken here, and they should not persist. And we should also make clear, also in view of the general elections to be held next year, that there might be a new German government, thus a new game, and maybe we get back on the track, which Jim has just mentioned. We would love to see our government in such a position. So I expect from the federal government that they don't use beautiful words only. I don't want to see window dressing only. I want them to act in their everyday, very concrete decisions. So they should stop damaging energy sources, and they should truly protect the climate. And with respect to the LNG terminals in Germany, I'd like to see a withdrawal of all support and a farewell. And if it comes to the sponsoring of foreign trade and the economy abroad, there should not be any support anymore for such type of projects. Well, thank you, my dear panelists, for your presentations, your interest, your contributions. Now it's 5:33 in Germany. Maybe it's a bit earlier in Canada still. So your day is just beginning. The day in Berlin is ending. I would like to thank you for your attention. We have published the presentations online. They are available online. You can access them, and this talk has been recorded, and you can watch it and listen to it once again. And as far as the protection of our climate is concerned, don't talk, just do it. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Nadine.
Danke dir.
As well.